Japanese silk is silk harvested in Japan. The farming process can be tasking but amazing for their farmers. In this video, we will be talking about how Japanese silkworm farming is conducted, and we'll also talk about silk cocoon harvest and process in factory. But before we begin, make sure you like this video and hit the subscribe icon. Now, let's get going into the silk industry. Silkworm farming was indeed dominant from the 1930s to the 1950s, but it is less common now. Silkworms, or sericulture raising, is a traditional side crop for Japanese farm families. Prior to the 1950s, most of the agriculture in Japan was organic. The reason for this is that pesticides and chemical fertilizers were not used. Human waste, which is also referred to as night soil, was collected by farmers and used as fertilizer. During this era, the introduction of chemical pesticides significantly increased crop yields and reduced insect damage. In the 1970s and 1980s, consumers began to worry about the health effects of chemical pesticides, which created a market for organic food crops. When it comes to organic produce, it is always distributed through cooperatives that directly link farmers to urban consumers. However, it is becoming even more available in many urban grocery stores specializing in natural foods. Silkworms are used to obtain targeted proteins by the expression of cloned genes. One of these utilization methods is to obtain targeted proteins. This is done by integrating cloned DNA into the virus's genome living within host silkworms. When this happens, transgenic virus increases rapidly in the silkworm body, and the silkworms typically die in a few days due to the proliferation of the virus. That's why it's important to produce proteins derived from exogenous genes more effectively. However, the exogenous gene's productivity efficiency depends significantly on the host silkworm strain. Before the pre-modern period or Tokugawa era, raw silk was mainly produced in Kyoto and a few cities in the surrounding area. The history of Kyoto's silk fabric dates back to ancient times. However, its production started flourishing after craftsmen who sought refuge from the Anin Bunmi Wars began gathering and resuming their work in Kyoto's Nishan district. A while after, these craftsmen who made Nishan weave became one of the leading consumers of raw silk in Japan. However, most of the silk they used was white thread imported from China during the Ming and Qing dynasties. A resurgence in domestic raw silk production took place after 1685, which had somewhat declined. When the Edo shogunate decided to block what it felt were more than necessary imports of white thread and put import restrictions in place, this policy effect had become evident by the beginning of the 18th century. The weavers of Nishin were using great amounts of raw silk produced in Japan. Silk reeling and sericulture spread from Japan's Shibu region to the Tokahu and Kanto areas. Notably, production thrived in Unio, Oshuero, and the Tosando region of Shinano, making it gradually spread to outlying areas, where it became an essential source of income for farming families not being able to earn a living from agriculture alone. This made it become a cottage industry, a side business that could be pursued during slack seasons in farming. The process of conducting silkworm farming, noted by the revered early 19th century, required much attention in order to match the hatching of young silkworms with the new foliage budding that had to be later fed to the larva, but it could only be before the formation of flowers. The mulberry acreage expansion took the form of collecting and planting mulberry seeds, or another layering process known as toriki. The distribution of land dedicated to mulberry fields reflected the growing importance of the plant for silk production. Mulberry fields occupied about 14% of all agriculturally available land in 1904 and grew to around 24% by 1933. When it comes to raising silkworms, what the family has to first do is grow enough mulberry trees to feed the silkworms. After that, they produce a supply of silkworm eggs from the previous year's crop or purchase them. The eggs are placed on large, flat trays, usually kept in the warm farmhouse attic. When the eggs hatch, the family picks mulberry leaves and feeds the silkworms, which eat voraciously as they grow. After this, the silkworms build a cocoon around their bodies for the next developmental stage. Generally, farmers sell the cocoons to a silk mill, and they will save a small number of seed cocoons in order to produce silkworm eggs for the next crop of silkworms and to complete the life cycle. Commercial reeling machines used silk mills to unwind the silk from the cocoons and produce silk thread of different weights for weaving cloth. Only a few households still raise silkworms today. This is so because silk can be produced much more cheaply in most countries. When the export of silk declined in 2020, the Japanese government encouraged mulberry fields to be modified into mikan orchards. Going from an international perspective, China now possesses silkworm bioresources on a large scale, which may also hold more races for sericulture than Japan. However, Japan retains a more favorable position than China regarding gene mutant strains that have been scientifically proven to be more helpful. India and Korea also have a particular scale of resources, while national resources that center in Europe are found in France, Italy, and Bulgaria, housing 60, 120, and 220 strains respectively. There is, however, no stock center in the United States. This makes the silkworm a resource available more in Asia, and it is safe to note that Japan has been playing a central role. And that's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to this channel and give this video a like. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.